Shalom, loved ones. In John chapter 14, verses 1 through 4, Jesus says, "Do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God. Trust me then. My Father's house has many dwelling places. If it were not so, would I have told you that I am going there to prepare a place for all of you? And if I go and prepare a place for all of you, I will come back and take you all to be with me, that you also may be where I am. You already know the way to the place where I am going." He speaks these words to his disciples on the night before his crucifixion. He knows already that what will happen in the next 24 hours will trouble them deeply. So he speaks peace to them by telling them that though he will be gone for a while, he will return to take them to be with him once again. And where he wants to take them is a place of peace. His Father's house, where there are many dwelling places, he says. Enough room for them all. In the verses that follow, it's evident that the disciples are confused about what Jesus is trying to tell them. It didn't make sense to them that he was going to prepare a place for them in his Father's house, because to them, his Father's house was the temple. Though they had visited the temple many times, there was no way on earth they would ever imagine living in the temple as if it was their home. What was he telling them? Was he saying that he was going to secure the temple for them so they could live there? About 3 years earlier, near the beginning of John's Gospel, Jesus had driven out the merchants and money changers from the temple courts. Was that simply a cleansing to prepare the temple for a more complete occupation of it? They didn't understand what he was saying. What did he mean when he said that he was preparing dwelling places for them all in his Father's house? Well, despite the disciples' confusion, Jesus couldn't have been clearer. He had been showing them and telling them all along that he was the new tabernacle, a living, breathing, on-the-move embodiment of God's presence right in their midst. No longer did they need to associate being in God's presence with going to a fixed location in Jerusalem. No longer would their synagogue consist of 4 walls and a roof in a certain village. Jesus himself was their synagogue in all the places they went, on the hillside, in their homes, by the sea, on the plains, and along the river. In his very life, death, and resurrection, he would fulfill all the functions of the temple and the synagogue. He himself embodied and contained the entirety of God's presence and activity among them. He himself was the Father's house. This is why he tells them not to be troubled, but to trust him and his ways. knowing that the darkness of the crucifixion would give way to the light of the resurrection. This is what Jesus is trying to tell them when he speaks of going to prepare a place for them. He makes a way for us to make our home in him through his death and resurrection. Now, this has profound implications not only for how we think about the afterlife, but perhaps even more importantly, how we think about our life in him in this life. For starters, it means that we can fully entrust ourselves to him because he, as the very tabernacle of God, takes into himself all the pain and suffering of our lives through the crucifixion. Jesus is the light not because he is distant from the darkness, but because he opens himself up to embrace the darkness so he can transform it by the light of his love. The purity of Jesus is not that he pushes us away for our imperfection, but that he holds our sin in the arms of his grace. This is the kind of dwelling place he has prepared for us already. It's a place where we can come to God just as we are, because atonement has already been made for us. We don't have to be good enough to receive his grace. It is in receiving his grace and grace alone that we are made good enough. Now this sets us free. It gives us a new lease on life and plants our feet in a spacious kind of place, a place of many dwelling places, as Jesus puts it, a space that is big enough for all kinds of people. When we read Jesus' words about preparing a place for us, we often get the idea that when we get to heaven, there will be a nice house waiting for us to live in, and that will be our house. But this misses much of what Jesus is trying to tell his followers. For starters, he's not only telling them about what their life will be like in the afterlife, but he is describing a reality he wants us to experience here and now. A life of making him our dwelling place here and now, so our eyes can be open to the reality that the place he has prepared for us is made up, in fact, of many dwelling places. It includes the very places we inhabit in the course of our day-to-day lives. It is an invitation to live, then, with wide-eyed wonder, on the lookout for the presence and activity of God in all places and all times, with all people. In other words, the more you follow Jesus, the more spacious your soul becomes. This comes across in the word that Jesus uses when he talks about the place he is preparing for us. The word in Greek is the same word from which our word topography is derived. Jesus says he goes to prepare a topon for us, a topography. It's not just a house. It's a landscape, a topography, a field and forest with rolling hills. There might be a lake and river there. The sky is expansive and the ground is rich. The place, the topon, the topography he prepares for us consists of many places where we can dwell in his presence. And this is our peace. It's a peace that cannot be described adequately, but you know it by the stillness of awe and wonder. It's a peace that reminds us when we feel we are being swallowed up by death that Jesus conquered the grave and came back to us in his resurrection. Taken together, this is how he has prepared a place for us. So when we entrust ourselves to him, as he invites us to do in verse 1, we discover a home in him like no other. It's a spacious place filled with joy in sorrow, beauty in the chaos, hope when despair would overwhelm us, solidarity when we feel God-forsaken, companionship when we feel lonely, love and understanding when we are attacked and misunderstood. All of this Jesus has gathered to himself by his death on the cross and his rising from the grave. So dearly beloved, may we live in the light of this reality here and now. And may we live in hope that even in death, Jesus can be trusted to make good on his word, to take us into his wide open heart, where our hearts shall not be troubled. Amen and amen.